This is a kind of very exciting occasion for me because Albert Herring's a piece that's kind of followed me throughout my entire life. I think it was probably one of the first operas that I ever saw. I was brought up in Newcastle, and in those days, the very early days of Scottish opera, they used to come about 3 times a year and bringing a whole range of different repertoire with them. And I think in the particular week that they brought Albert Herring, I also saw The Marriage of Figaro and Don Pasquale. And because I was only 11 or 12 or something like that at the time, I didn't notice the difference. And so what I find extraordinary is that here we are, Albert Herring, 75 years old, and it's still regarded as being modern and sort of out of reach and out of touch in some sort of way. I don't think anything could be further from the truth. It's one of the most extraordinarily fresh and brilliant and melodic and lyrical pieces of music theatre of the 20th century. It just dazzles, it just sparkles all the way through. It's got one of those incredible librettos, which even if you took the music away, the text would still be funny. It would hold up as a play in itself. And that's an incredible thing. Not a lot of operas can do that. A lot of operas tend to fall incredibly flat without any music behind them at all. This one is somehow kind of lifted by the music, and you get them both inhabiting exactly the same sphere of the drama all the way through. Reminds me very much of what the late, great, much lamented Stephen Sondheim said about musical theatre, which is that the words have to sit on the music. They have to float on the music. And if they don't, one or other will drown. That doesn't happen in Albert Herring. Just a little bit about the background and the context. Albert Herring was the third of 3 operas which Benjamin Britten premiered in the space of 15 months. The first one was the absolutely gigantic Peter Grimes, which is just like one of those great big 19th century war horses with an enormous chorus, an enormous orchestra, huge set of soloists, endless scene changes, storms and lots of dramatic effects going on and all this kind of thing. The next one is something which couldn't be really very, very much different. It's The Rape of Lucretia, and it's a small, intense, kind of really rather disturbing and I think personally rather unpleasant and rather unsettling kind of opera about, well, what it says on the tin. That was paired with Albert Herring. And Albert Herring, written for the same sources as The Rape of Lucretia and more or less the same company as well, just turns the whole thing inside out and turns everything that's gloomy and dark and miserable and oppressive about The Rape of Lucretia into something that's brilliant and fun and outward going and exciting in Albert Herring. And the great thing about it is, spoiler alert coming up, it's got a happy ending. So whatever else goes on, it's going to end well. When Britten came to write Albert Herring, it was, he'd founded a company called the English Opera Group, which he founded with his partner Peter Pears and with a lot of other friends as well. And it was partly because when they'd gone to Sadler's Wells for the premiere of Peter Grimes, which was a huge success, an absolutely gigantic success, in 1945, there was a lot of backbiting, there was a lot of kind of nastiness backstage, and there was a lot, typical opera house, a lot of power struggle going on. And so they decided to sort of get themselves out of that and go somewhere where they had slightly more control of the situation. So they found themselves in Glyndebourne, which wasn't really the Glyndebourne, certainly not the Glyndebourne that we know today. And even then, when they first premiered the opera, it was only 12 or 13 years old, and of course had been closed during the war. So Glyndebourne wanted a product, the English Opera Group wanted a home, and that's where the whole thing started. But it wasn't a marriage made in heaven. John Christie, who had founded Glyndebourne, had been, I think, a senior master, if not actually headmaster at Eton at some stage. And he'd founded Glyndebourne specifically so that his wife, a soprano called Audrey Mildmay, would have somewhere where she could sing without having to go abroad and leave him as part of an international career. And let's say that his tastes and Britten and Pears's tastes went in rather different directions. And it's rumoured, or reported anyway, that during the Albert Herring performances, old John Christie, who always wore evening dress, of course, as one does at Glyndebourne, but tennis shoes with the evening dress, because he was, after all, at home, wandered round the car park, going up to people and saying, well, thank you for coming so far, but, I don't think you're going to enjoy it. It's really not our kind of thing. So after that, they went their separate ways, and Britten embarked on a really extraordinary career, which I think involved something like almost, 14 operas. He hardly ever returned to comedy again, and I think that's rather a pity, because his flair for comedy is quite extraordinary, as I hope you'll understand and appreciate this evening. What's really interesting about Albert Herring is that Britten had been in America for all of the war years. He was a conscientious objector, and so he went to stay with various friends all over New England and in New York, including an extraordinary stint in a brownstone house in New York, where the landlady was none other than Gypsy Rose Lee, the stripper. So it was a very sort of bohemian household, and I'm sure that during that time that he was there, after all, what came back in 1944 is the premiere of Oklahoma, which is, the groundbreaking musical, the American musical, and I'm sure that Britten must have known people like Bernstein and all this kind of thing, and you can hear a lot of popular music, show music, in the structure of Albert Herring. Britten comes back not having been in England really since 1939, and of course it's laid waste, it's dreary, it's miserable, still rationing, still gloomy, and there's this terrible kind of chasm going on within the society, which is that on one side, the old brigade want everything to go back to where it was beforehand. They want to reset the clock to 1938. And on the other side are all the young people who've gone and done the fighting, or been brought up during the Blitz and suffered all the deprivations of wartime and this kind of thing, and they want to move ahead, and they want to do something new, and they want to do something else. And so the central conflict of this particular comedy is between the older generation and the rising generation, and sparks fly, basically. I'm not going to give any more away than that. But it creates a wonderful sort of comic tension. Now, one of the things that I think is very interesting about productions of Albert Herring, most productions of Albert Herring, is that the piece was originally set by Britten in 1900, but he was writing it in 1945, 1946. We've decided to set ours in 1945, 1946, which is longer ago now than it was when Britten looked back to 1900. And that's partly to kind of reflect that time that Britten was writing in, and some of the perceptions that he had. He was a very strange man. He was a very conflicted man. On one side, he was very, very conventional, very rather uptight, and a bit sort of loved his titles. He ended up being the Lord Britain and, all of these, Companion of Honour and all this kind of thing. Loved all of these honours, but at the same time was also quite radical in his thinking. And that sort of comes through, that kind of split sort of comes through in the story and in the music as well. And so what we have is, in his view of the older people, the establishment people, the worthies of the town of Loxford, is that he's quite cruel, he's quite critical about them. And a lot of productions over the last 75 years have kind of made them a little bit softer, a little bit more kind of bumbling, and a little bit more Miss Marple than perhaps they need to be. We've decided not to do it that way. I hope that when we go back to Britten's, what I think was Britten's original intention, I hope that it matches the score, which is the most extraordinarily kind of vital and percussive and sometimes aggressive score. The whole piece reminds me very, very much of an Ealing comedy. The sort of the Lady Killers and the Lavender Hill Mob and all that kind of thing. It's that kind of world, it's that kind of time, it's that sort of mindset. But it's got a dash of bitters thrown across the entire thing, which really sparks it up and makes it one of the most dazzling pieces that I think there is in comic opera. I would say the operas of Rossini, 2 or 3 of the comedies of Mozart, Falstaff, and this one, the greatest comic operas ever written. So I hope you enjoy it, and I hope that's given you enough information about the background, and that you have a great evening. And thank you so much for coming to Clonter, and thank you so much for coming to Albert Herring. Wish him well. Thank you.